Why I feel fake calling myself a Christian. Before we measure the world, we measure what moved inside us. This is the inner measure with Reasonaut X, short talks where music, thought, and life meet in the same room. Take the measure inward, then carry it outward. Resonate, elevate, demonstrate. Visit Reasonaut X on Facebook for conscious music, new thoughts, and conversations that keep the signal moving. There is something I've tried to explain more times than I can count. And every time I try to explain it, I feel like I almost get there, but not quite. So I want to dedicate this talk to it. Why don't I like calling myself a Christian? Why does that word feel strange coming out of my mouth? Why, even though I believe there was a man named Jesus, even though I take many of his teachings seriously, even though I believe there is something greater than us, why do I feel fake when I say I'm a Christian? And before somebody gets defensive, this isn't me telling anybody else what they should call themselves. I'm not telling Christians they aren't Christians. I'm not condemning churches. I'm not condemning believers. I can't look inside another human being and determine what is actually moving inside them. I don't possess that authority. I'm talking about me, my measure, my questions, my conscience, because I have reached a place where I would rather tell you honestly what I don't know than pretend certainty just because certainty makes people comfortable. And when I say the word Christian, something inside me doesn't sit right, because the word has become so easy to say that sometimes I don't know what it means anymore. A person can say, I'm a Christian. Okay, what does that tell me? Does it mean you believe Jesus existed? Does it mean you believe Jesus was the Son of God? Does it mean you were raised in a Christian household? Does it mean you attend church? Does it mean you accepted Jesus when you were 8 years old? Does it mean you believe the Bible is the literal word of God? Does it mean you believe parts of it? Does it mean you vote a particular way? Does it mean you celebrate Christmas? Does it mean you believe you'll go to heaven when you die? Because those are very different things. And somehow we put them all underneath one word, Christian. And then sometimes we allow that word to speak for the person, as though the label itself is testimony. But I don't want a label testifying for me. I want my movement to testify for me. Because there is a difference between saying what you believe and becoming what you believe. And that difference bothers me. It bothers me deeply because a lot of what we call belief was never really discovered. It was inherited. We were taught it. Our parents believed it. Our grandparents believed it. The community believed it. The church believed it. Everybody around us repeated it. And eventually we learned the words. That doesn't automatically make the belief wrong. Something can be taught to you and still be true. But being taught something is not the same thing as examining it. And I think that's where I started separating from the label. Because eventually I started asking, why? Why do I believe this? Where did this idea come from? What did the text actually say? What did somebody later tell me the text meant? Are those the same thing? What changed historically? What changed theologically? What changed culturally? And what have I been repeating simply because somebody gave it to me before I was old enough to question it? Take the 10 Commandments. They were given within a covenant involving Israel, a particular people, a particular history, a particular relationship with God. And then Christianity tells us that through Jesus, something changed, a new covenant, something significant happened. Different Christian traditions explain that change differently. Some say parts of the old law remain while other parts were fulfilled. Some divide the law into categories. Some emphasize grace. Some emphasize covenant. Some emphasize fulfillment. Some emphasize different ages or dispensations. There are libraries full of explanations, but that's part of my problem. Because the average person can say, we followed the 10 Commandments without ever having to examine what that actually means. Do we? Really? Not just the ones we put on a courthouse wall. Not just the ones that fit comfortably into modern life. What does keeping the Sabbath actually mean? What did it mean within the covenant where it was given? Why do some commands remain foundational while others from the same larger body of law are treated as belonging to another time? Who drew that line? And why? I'm not saying nobody has answers. I'm asking whether most of us ever had to know the answers before saying, I believe, because that troubles me. If I'm going to build my life on something, I want to know what I'm standing on. I don't want hypocrisy built into the foundation. And by hypocrisy, I don't just mean somebody knowingly lying. Sometimes hypocrisy is simply the distance between what we claim and what we actually practice. We say we honor something, but we don't know what it says. We say we follow something, but we don't actually follow it. We say it is absolute until following it becomes inconvenient. And then suddenly there's an interpretation. Maybe that interpretation is right, but I want to know why. Because I can't switch my mind off just because somebody uses the word faith. Faith should not require intellectual dishonesty. I don't believe truth should require me to pretend I don't notice questions. And I notice them. I notice questions around sin. We're often taught that God is so holy that sin cannot exist in his presence. That idea gets used to explain separation, temple systems, sacrifice, purity, humanity's distance from God. And then Christianity teaches that God enters humanity. God enters flesh. And then I start asking questions. If human beings are born into sin, when does that begin? At conception? At birth? At conscious moral choice? What exactly is inherited? Guilt? A damaged nature? A tendency? Mortality? Something else? Different traditions answer those questions differently. But when I was younger, nobody told me there were different answers. They just gave me one. As though God personally mailed the explanation directly to our denomination. And when you start questioning it, people sometimes get uncomfortable. But why? If something is true, shouldn't examination strengthen it? Then there is the language of image. Genesis says humanity was created in the image of God. Later, when Seth is born, the language says Adam fathered a son in his own likeness, after his image. That makes me curious. What exactly does image mean? Physical form? Consciousness? Creative capacity? Moral responsibility? Relationship? Representation? Something else entirely? I don't know. And I'm comfortable saying, I don't know. That's one of the biggest differences between who I am today and who I used to be. I no longer need to plug every hole in existence with an answer just because uncertainty makes somebody nervous. Sometimes, I don't know is the most truthful sentence available, and I would rather stand in an honest unknown than live inside a dishonest certainty. But none of those questions are actually the biggest reason I hesitate to call myself a Christian. The biggest reason is fruit, because when I read Jesus, whatever somebody believes, Jesus was. Divine, human, Messiah, teacher, prophet, Son of God, whatever conclusion somebody reaches, I cannot escape how much of his teaching involves movement. Do something. Forgive. Feed. Serve. Love. Give. Care. Visit. Lift. Carry. Turn away from hypocrisy. Look at yourself before condemning somebody else. Watch what kind of fruit a tree produces. That hits me. Fruit. Because fruit can't be argued into existence. A tree doesn't hold a conference about apples. Eventually, either apples show up or they don't. And Christianity sometimes seems to have created a strange loophole where a person can identify strongly with Jesus while producing almost nothing that resembles him. And somehow, the identity survives. A person can be cruel, still Christian. Vindictive, still Christian. Greedy, still Christian. Dishonest, still Christian. Obsessed with power, still Christian. Hateful toward people who are different, still Christian. Ignore suffering, still Christian. Cheat people, still Christian. Exploit people, still Christian. And then say, but I believe. And maybe Christian theology has explanations for all of that. Grace, sanctification, human imperfection. Nobody is without sin. I understand those arguments. I'm not expecting perfection. That's not my measure. My problem is when belief becomes permission not to transform. When grace becomes an excuse not to grow, when forgiveness becomes an insurance policy instead of a doorway into responsibility. Because if I believe something, at some point, shouldn't something happen? If I believe love matters, shouldn't I become more loving? If I believe forgiveness matters, shouldn't I become more capable of forgiveness? If I believe every human being has value, shouldn't that become visible in how I treat people I don't like? If I believe humility matters, shouldn't I eventually become a little less obsessed with proving everybody else wrong? Where is the fruit? That's where I struggle. And again, I'm not saying Christians don't produce good fruit. Of course they do. There are Christians feeding people, housing people, adopting children, visiting prisoners, taking care of the sick, helping strangers, giving away money, forgiving enemies, standing beside people everybody else abandoned. There are people living beautiful lives through Christianity. I would be dishonest if I ignored them but they are beautiful because of what they are doing, not merely because of what they call themselves, and that distinction matters to me, because a label should describe movement. It shouldn't replace it. I think about Jesus talking about carrying your cross. People interpret that passage in different theological ways. But what it says to me personally is, there are parts of this life nobody can carry for me. Nobody can carry my character for me. Nobody can carry my decisions. Nobody can carry my appetites. Nobody can carry my wounds. Nobody can carry my responsibility. Nobody can raise my children for me. Nobody can repair the damage I caused for me. Nobody can apologize for me. Nobody can become disciplined for me. Nobody can love for me. Nobody can become me for me. I have to carry something, and sometimes I wonder whether we made Jesus carry so much that we forgot we were supposed to get up and walk behind him. We talk endlessly about what Christ did for us. Maybe we should also be asking, what are we doing because of it? That's different. And this is where people sometimes misunderstand me. I haven't necessarily rejected Jesus. I've rejected pretending that saying his name makes me resemble him. Those aren't the same thing. Actually, maybe the reason the word Christian bothers me is because I take that distinction too seriously. If I'm going to wear somebody's name, I think that should cost me something. If I say I follow someone, you ought to eventually see footprints. And maybe that's why I develop different language for what I believe. I believe there is something larger, something beyond this individual body, a greater order, a structure, a totality, a connectedness. Call it God if you want. That's a powerful word, a beautiful word. But sometimes that word already carries so many definitions from everybody else's childhood that when I use it, people think they know exactly what I mean, and they don't. So I use another word, accordion. Not accordion, cordium. It's my language. I don't need anybody else to use it. I don't need a church of accordion. Please don't build one. We already have enough buildings. I don't need followers. I don't need converts. I don't need you to believe what I believe for me to believe it. And that matters enormously to me because truth doesn't require recruitment. Truth doesn't require a marketing department. Truth doesn't need me knocking on your door. If something is actually true, my disbelief cannot kill it, and my belief cannot create it. Truth just is. Gravity doesn't get offended because somebody doesn't understand gravity. The sun doesn't stop shining because somebody voted against daylight. Reality doesn't have an insecurity problem. Truth doesn't need applause, and truth doesn't have to pick my side. That's another place where my understanding of God changed. People say, if God is real, God will make us win. Why? Why would truth automatically pick you? Because you prayed louder? Because your flag is different? Because your church is bigger? Because you said the right name? What if both sides are praying? What if both sides believe God belongs to them? What if both armies have crosses around their necks? Then what? I don't believe the greater totality of existence has to join my team to prove itself real. Truth doesn't pick a side simply because I want it to. Truth contains the conditions that allow sides to exist in the first place. That scares people because we want God to be our ultimate advantage, our final tiebreaker, our divine older brother who comes outside when the neighborhood kids start fighting. My dad can beat up your dad, except now. My God can beat up your God, and grown people do the same thing children do. We just use bigger words. That's something I study constantly. Children, because adults don't suddenly become different creatures. Children grow, their strategies grow, their vocabulary grows, their social tools become more sophisticated. But sometimes the original pattern is still sitting underneath everything. Think about a child who spends the whole class watching everybody else. Teacher, she got out of line. Teacher, he took 2. Teacher, they're talking. Meanwhile, that child is trying to sneak one more cookie into their own pocket. Why are they watching everybody else so hard? Sometimes, because catching somebody else breaking the rules makes them feel safer about themselves. Adults do that. Religion can do that. Politics can do that. Morality can do that. Social class can do that. Anything can become a tool for comparison. Instead of asking, what should I become? We ask, who can I prove is worse than me? And now judgment points outward. It becomes much easier to inspect somebody else's life than to renovate your own. Maybe that's one reason Jesus talks so much about judgment, Take care of the plank in your own eye. That's brutal. Because working on yourself is hard. Judging somebody else is easy. You don't even have to leave the couch. And fear is underneath a lot of it. If my identity depends on being correct, then somebody else's disagreement feels like an attack. If my salvation depends on belonging to the right group, then people outside my group become dangerous. If heaven belongs to people who believe what I believe, then disagreement suddenly carries eternal consequences. And now I have enormous psychological pressure to make you agree with me. But I don't feel that pressure anymore. You don't have to believe what I believe. You can disagree with every word of this. That's okay. Because if I'm right, your disagreement doesn't change reality. And if I'm wrong, your agreement wouldn't save me from being wrong. Think about that. 1 million people believing something doesn't make it true. One person believing something doesn't make it false. Truth doesn't count hands. And that's why I don't want to fight people over belief. I'll discuss it. I'll question it. I'll explore it. I'll listen. I'll challenge. I'll be challenged. But fight? Why? What am I protecting? If it's truth, it doesn't need me standing in front of it with a sword. I need truth. Truth doesn't need me. And maybe this is where Christianity became difficult for me. Because sometimes I watch people defend Christianity with behavior that seems completely opposite to Christ. Cruelty in defense of love. Hatred in defense of holiness. Dishonesty in defense of truth. Violence in defense of peace. Pride in defense of humility. And I'm standing there thinking, do you hear us? Do we hear ourselves? We can become so committed to defending the sign that we burn down the thing the sign was pointing toward. And I don't want that. I don't want to win a theological argument and lose my humanity. I don't want to prove somebody wrong and become ugly doing it. I don't want to defend Jesus by behaving in a way Jesus would have to correct. So, am I a Christian? I don't know. According to some definitions, probably. According to others, probably not. And I'm okay with that. Call me whatever makes the filing cabinet easier. I'm more interested in another question. What am I producing? Am I more patient than I used to be? Am I more honest? Am I more accountable? Do I treat people better? Can I admit when I'm wrong? Can I forgive? Can I protect without becoming cruel? Can I lead without dominating? Can I love without possessing? Can I speak truth without humiliating somebody? Can I recognize my own fear before I turn it into somebody else's punishment? Can I wake up tomorrow and bring something better into the world than I brought today? That's my religion, if you need to call it something. Wake up and do it. Try to bring heaven to earth, not someday, not after I die. Here, in this house, in this family, in this workplace, in this conversation, in how I treat the cashier, in how I treat the person who made me angry, in how I speak to my children, in how I treat somebody who can't do anything for me, in how I behave when nobody is watching. Because if heaven represents peace, bring some peace. If heaven represents mercy, bring some mercy. If heaven represents justice, be just. If heaven represents love, love somebody. If heaven represents truth, stop lying. If heaven represents reconciliation, repair something. Maybe heaven isn't only somewhere we're trying to go. Maybe heaven is also something we're responsible for practicing. And maybe that's why I feel fake saying, I'm a Christian. Because I'm not sure I want the noun. I want the verbs. I don't want the bumper sticker. I want the movement. I don't want to tell you what team I'm on. Watch how I play. And if you don't see anything worthwhile, then my label wouldn't have saved the message anyway. Call yourself Christian. Call yourself Muslim. Call yourself Jewish. Call yourself Buddhist. Call yourself Hindu. Call yourself atheist, agnostic, spiritual, nothing at all. Those words may tell me something about how you understand existence, and they deserve respect. But eventually, the word has to stop talking for you. Eventually, you have to move. Eventually, the tree has to produce something. And whatever I believe about Jesus, this much reaches me deeply. Good trees should produce good fruit. So that's my measure. Not your denomination, not your Bible translation, not whether you can quote chapter and verse faster than somebody else, not how loudly you worship, not how certain you sound. Fruit. What happens around you because you exist? Do people become safer? Do they become stronger? Do they become more afraid? Do they become smaller? Do you heal? Do you wound? Do you repair? Do you exploit? What grows from your presence? That's harder than saying, I'm a Christian, and maybe that's exactly why I need it. because I don't want a belief system that makes me feel righteous. I want one that makes me responsible. I don't want a God who constantly tells me how much better I am than everybody else. I want truth that shows me where I'm still crooked. I want something that challenges me to grow. Something that asks me, what did you do with today? What did you do with the people who trusted you? What did you do with the pain you inherited? Did you pass it forward, or did you transform it? What did you do with your power? What did you do with your fear? What did you create? What did you repair? Who became better because you were here? Those are questions I can feel. So maybe I don't need to know exactly what to call myself. Maybe I don't need the label yet. Maybe I never will. Because maybe the label is not the measure anyway. The movement is. And if there really is something greater than me, something holding this whole impossible existence together, then I hope it judges me less by what I called it and more by what I did with the life it gave me. I don't need you to believe what I believe for me to believe it. I don't need you to use my language. I don't need you to call it accordion. I don't need you to stop calling yourself Christian. I'm asking something much smaller and much harder. Whatever you say you believe, live long enough in it, honestly enough that eventually somebody can see it. Don't tell me what you believe. Live near me long enough that I can see it. Because words can lie, labels can lie, institutions can lie, people can lie. But eventually, fruit tells the story. And maybe that is what I've been trying to say all along. I don't feel fake because I don't believe anything. I feel fake because the word Christian feels like it says more about me than I am willing to claim. It feels like a finished statement, and I don't feel finished. I'm still measuring, still learning, still questioning, still correcting, still trying to turn what I believe into something another human being can actually feel when they encounter me. Maybe that's enough. Maybe instead of worrying so much about what we are called, we should spend a little more time asking what our lives are saying. Because eventually, the label fades, the argument fades, the sermon fades, the building fades, the institution fades, but the effects of how we treated one another, those travel. The mercy travels, the cruelty travels, the patience travels, the anger travels, the love travels, the fear travels. We leave pieces of ourselves in people. That may be the deepest fruit of all. So if you call yourself a Christian, live it. If you call yourself anything else, live that honestly too. But don't let the word become a hiding place. Don't let identity replace responsibility. Don't let belief become something you carry in your mouth, but never in your hands. Take the measure inward, then carry it outward. Resonate, elevate, demonstrate. This is Reasonaut X. Visit Reasonaut X on Facebook for conscious music, thoughts, and conversation. Leave your thoughts or comments and let the measure travel.